I see us now.
Okay, you see us now?
I see
All right.
us.
So we're going to actually start then. Well, welcome to the TForce LCS Rundown. First episode. I am Mike Norm, your co-host, joined by Optimus Tom
That's me. Hi guys, what's up?
and Reckern.
And that's me. Hello, everybody.
And welcome to the first episode. Barring a few technical difficulties, we are here and live to talk about the LCS. So, Optimus Tom, why don't you take us through a little bit of what this show is going to be and who we are?
All right, guys. Well, first off, you can find us on our fancy schmancy URL if you're just tuning in now live, or of course to the first podcast episode on lcs.trinityforcepodcast.com. It's very awesome, very easy to find URL, very simple kind of stuff. But we're going to be going live with this broadcast every single week, same time, same place. 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 6 p.m. for you friends over on the west coast of things. And for everybody over in Europe who might be paying attention to the podcast, well, you're probably going to be asleep, and that's why you're listening to the recording of it rather than the live episode here. But it's awesome because we're going to get a chance to run down all the professional play. We're going to talk about the LCS. We're going to hit up some of the Asian regions as well. And we're going to really be able to break down not only just what's happened in the week of LCS games, but also what's going on with the individual pro players as well. So this will be the place you get to find your favorite players, your favorite teams, and breakdown of what's gone on in the professional scene over the past week.
Cool. And why don't you throw out some of your credentials, Recker? Who are you? And
I am Reckern. I've been playing League of Legends since beta, and I love to hit my microphone apparently, as I gesticulate. But I've been playing since beta. I was part of the Trinity Force Podcast for a while. Had to leave from there for reasons which no longer exist. So now I am joining this podcast. Yeah, and I'm just a huge League of Legends fan. Just love it. Huge nerd.
cool.
Well, I think we all are.
Before we get to me, Optimus Tom, do you want to run through everybody who you are? If they
Well,
don't know
let's-
already, which if you
So,
don't, shame on
my
you.
name is Optimus Tom. I am a League of Legends shoutcaster. You might know me from the MLG things, the IPL things, may they rest in peace. I did a lot of my own stuff with the Trinity Force podcast before I had to leave because my casting was more of a full-time kind of thing. I also am very heavily invested in the European LCS right now. But basically, yeah, I live and breathe League of Legends, and if I do something incorrectly that involves League of Legends, well, that's shame on me, because I should probably know more.
Awesome. And I am Mott Gnorum. I am the previous host of the Instalock Mid podcast and was brought in here to help you guys out. I am a big NA LCS fanatic, not huge into the Korean scene and only partially into the European scene. So I will be learning along with everybody else while we do this show. We're really excited about it. We are, if you notice the name, a part of the Trinity Force Podcast Network, I think is the proper name for it. So you can go and check out our mother show, the Trinity Force Podcast, which airs on Mondays and Wednesdays at 8 p.m. EST on this actually same Twitch channel, or check it out on iTunes or any of the other major podcast networks. And then there's also the Oz LOL podcast, which comes out on Thursdays. So there's plenty of League of Legends content to be had. Again, this focus is going to be primarily on LCS, talking about the games and the pro players, and taking it from there. So let's hop right into it. I want to start off by talking about what these, as most of you know, the LCS, we're already 5 weeks into it. We're in week 5 now. Most of those games have finished up. If you're watching live, the Challenger Series is currently playing. We won't be covering the Challenger Series as much. If anything crazy happens or something awesome like a Garen gets picked, for instance, we might choose to cover it.
That just happened.
Oh, it did. It's live. It's not on the books yet. But if something interesting comes up, we'll mention it, we'll talk about it, we'll see it through. But the focus will primarily be on the LCS side. So here we are, 5 weeks into it. What are your thoughts about the first 5 weeks for the NALCS record?
I got to say I'm not really surprised about anything. Team Soul Mid, Cloud9, CLG, top 3. That's kind of what I expected. And then you got Team Dignitas and Team Always Middle of the Pack Curse. Even though they always have such high expectations for themselves, they're always the middle of the pack.
I think they're the only one who has the high expectations. Maybe the people who face their paychecks.
I used to play into it. They got me.
Curse or die, guys. Come on. They have so many signs in the audience, and they still chant TSM, so I don't know what's up with that.
I don't think there's anybody in the audience who doesn't chant TSM. I think that's just the thing you do when you go to watch these games. Is if they do anything, kill a minion, TSM, TSM.
Plus, if you don't chant, then you're like the minority, and you just look kind of weird.
You get really uncomfortable that everybody's yelling around you.
Bad situation for yourself.
So one notable thing I think to talk about the first 5 weeks of the NALCS is definitely taking a look at Evil Geniuses. Brand new over to the NA. Obviously, they were a big contender on the EU scene for so long, but they really haven't been playing as well, I think, as many people would have expected them. I mean, when you have somebody like Snoopy on the team, you have a lot that goes into that. Tom, what do you think has really been going on with EG, and what's the deal? What's going on?
All right, so I have some very strong opinions on Evil Geniuses, and I'm really glad that I get to start this one off because
I would like to make a note that we haven't earned the explicit tag
on
iTunes yet.
So I have to say that one of the things that I feel I'm in the vocal minority with Evil Geniuses is going into the promotion relegation tournament when they took over Velocity spot. Because they brought in such a big name with themselves, with the 3 members of the old Evil Geniuses roster and Pobelter pretty much specifically, I'm in the vocal minority that thought that Evil Geniuses was overhyped going into the promotion relegation tournament. And I felt that people were severely underestimating Determined Gaming, now Complexity Black, as a roster that could really give them a big run for their money. Going into the tournament, I felt like Determined Gaming kind of didn't show up. I don't know if they just underestimated, they didn't prepare, or what was going on, but EG, they came out looking pretty cohesive. And the one thing that really sticks out to me is that they have a roster of people that have been in the scene for forever, and people that, even though they may have played for a little while, are still relatively young. Pobelter and Enoch exclusively. So kind of meshing them together, they have 2 different kind of philosophies going in. And the big thing about it is Enox and Pobelter really like taking risks. There's solo laners that will carry a game by themselves if you let them, but the rest of the team is so used to going for teamwork, the old CLG EU, let's drag these games out. They're not really big dynamic playmakers that can carry a game. So the thing is, going into the tournament and going into now the LCS, a lot of people will target Pobelter in picks and bans. They will ban out Snoopy's more limited champion pool. They will go after Enox in the top lane, targeting him with ganks and snowballing that very volatile kind of lane. Top lane has always been that way. Whoever picks up a kill first pretty much dominates that matchup unless you focus exclusive jungle attention up to there. So the big thing with Evil Geniuses for me is a lot of people expect a lot from them, when in reality, you have to look at them as a team that basically 1 month prior to the tournament had no experience playing together. They're a new roster. You have to look at them in those eyes. So having them win games, period, I think is a very big improvement and testament as to how they're growing as a team. But fundamentally, this team has so much hype behind them that I honestly don't think they can answer right now. The biggest problem is they need to come together as a unit. You have so many people from Froggen and when they played with Froggen and Wicked, who are now in Alliance, they used to have that synergy. It's not there, and unless they're playing compositions that are forcing them to do so, like more recently we've seen results this week where they're playing kind of the Stampede composition where everybody has to be on the same page, it's kind of working out for them. But until they develop that synergy, I still kind of feel like Evil Geniuses, they have to prove something to me. They can't go in and have like the hype that like a TSM or something has. This isn't a team that I expected to be top 4. I expected them to be on the bottom half, and right now they're impressing me with the fact that they have been able to pick up some pretty big wins.
Now, with a standing of 4 and 8, they're 7 overall in the league. They're below Coast. The only team that they're sitting above right now is XTG. Do you think that this is even really a savable season? I mean, what's it going to take other than the synergy? Is this something that you can even pull off in the 4 or 5 weeks that are left in this whole series?
I don't see Evil Geniuses as being a team that would be a contender for, say, number 1 or number 2. I wouldn't say that they're necessarily out of the playoffs at the end of the season, however, and they could potentially win the playoffs because they have players which are used to being in pressure situations and could actually pull that off. As far as what do I think their actual chances of getting into the playoffs are, pretty good. Making it through the playoffs, not that good.
Okay.
I would kind of have to piggyback on that one because for a little while in my casting career, I got to work as an analyst and a coach for a team called Double Buff, who became the late Napkins in Disguise in the Challenger circuit, where Enox originally came from. So I know what Enox can do, and I know the fact that his champion pool is limitless. He will, if he feels like he can play something, he'll just bust it out in a scrimmage. He'll play it to his heart's content, and then it's up to the rest of the team to see how they fit in with the rest of the composition. I feel the same is exactly for Pobelter, where these are two extremely strong solo laners. If you put them in a dome, if you put them on Magma Chamber and had them 1v1 against every other player in their position in the LCS, they would probably put up ridiculously spectacular results. But the fact of the matter is, Snoopé isn't regarded as one of the best junglers right now. His champion pool has always been a bit of a hindrance, and his overall skill level by comparison to some of the other junglers like the Odd One and Meteos, who he's now going up against, it's not quite there. So you need to be able to develop that synergy with your strong solo laners, because if they get out ahead, and as they work together as a team and get further in the season, we already seen kind of glimpses of that. If they connect onto the same page, that's their ticket. But how far in the hole down the standings are they going to be before that happens? I got to kind of agree with Reckern. By the time playoffs come around, they might be the last berth in the playoffs, and by that time, will they be figured out?
Yeah, that's pretty much nails it right there. One of the other things with Evil Geniuses is you mentioned Snoopé not being necessarily the strongest jungler, and I have to agree 100%. Even over in the Euro scene, he wasn't that great. When he was considered a good jungler is back in like season 1 or season 2, when you could just like play the utility jungler, get those gold per 5s and play kind of passive supporty. Now the jungler is expected more to make a lot more plays and be much bigger presence without the ability to just be the utility.
Okay. So overall, you think, I mean, with the shakeup that coming to the North American scene made with this team, do you really think it was, worth it for them to come over? Do you think that with the way that these players play and with the new players that are on the roster, do you think that this is a scene where they're actually going to be able to grow as a team and really make strong moves? Or do you see this as more of a hindrance where maybe we don't see them? Maybe we see them if we're lucky and they pull out some amazing plays and work really hard? Or
I'm going to go out on a limb and say it wasn't a necessary move, but I think from a personal growth standpoint, both as a player and as a personality in the League of Legends community, because you have to also factor that into it, is these players have been around for a very long time, and they're not always going to be able to play the game at that optimal level. But exposing themselves to multiple regions, making themselves known to multiple regions of fans. Like, obviously, everybody knew who the guys on Evil Geniuses were prior to this season, but new members of the LCS, like going into the region, which I'm going to go out on a limb and say a lot more people will pay a bit more attention to the NALCS. Not saying that the EULCS has less viewers or anything like that, but the NALCS, I mean, like, it's kind of where things got started. A lot of people know the TSMs, they know the Curse, they know CLG. These are the organizations that have been around forever.
The company is here, too.
Yeah.
Riot's here.
Like, Riot is literally physically in California. So being able to expose themselves to more fans, having the fans that they had back in Europe, exposing themselves to different teams and play styles and everything like that, I think if you kind of look at it in the way of, was it a good idea to break up the old Evil Geniuses? I don't think we can answer that question until we have a split or two under our belts to see where they wind up falling, because on the opposite side of the pond, Alliance isn't looking too hot either, but that's a completely different issue. But looking at it from a personal growth standpoint and a way to improve themselves as players, I think it wasn't a necessary move, but I think it's a move that will, in the end, make them stronger as individuals.
Okay. Well, I think that's actually a really good segue over to the other side of the pond, talking about the first 5 weeks in the EU. How do you guys think these first 5 weeks have been? I mean, obviously, Rocket, how are we even going to pronounce that?
Rocket Cats.
Rocket Cats. Obviously being a dominant force there, and a lot of familiar names, but, what do you think is going on there?
Well, I've talked a lot, so Reckern, you could take this one. Right?
I was trying to avoid talking because my throat's really sore, but sorry. Yeah, really, the Europe scene's been kind of surprising. Gambit Gaming, number 2, which no one's surprised to see them in the top 3, as well as Fnatic. But the Super Hot crew actually looking a lot stronger and could be climbing up, as well as what's their faces? SK Gaming. Either one of those teams could easily start climbing up into the second or third spots. So in the coming weeks of the Euro LCS, a lot could change.
I think
I don't pay attention too much to the EU LCS, but I'm looking at these scores here, and it doesn't seem, with the exception of Rocket, which we already talked about, but there's no one really dominating here. I mean, there's a lot of it seems to be pretty bland across the board, and I think Gambit, Fnatic, and SK, I guess I expected more out of them in terms of wins. It doesn't seem like they have been performing as well as they have been in the past.
So I
don't even necessarily know if I expected a lot of wins out of SK, but Gambit and Fnatic, I'm kind of surprised to see 4 and 5 losses on them.
Like, the big philosophy behind the EU LCS has always been that it's that close-knit kind of competition. Like, in the spring split of Season 3, we had Fnatic and Gambit above everybody else. Everybody else was still relatively close. Like, there was SK, then Evil Geniuses, and everybody else really close to them. Even Copenhagen Wolves, that lost, like, their first 6 games in the spring split, came back to be ranked number 5. So there's always that close-knit competition, and there's always, like, the fact that anybody can beat anybody. And in the past week alone, we've seen that. We've seen Fnatic go from 7-0 to 0-5 in the last 5 games. We've seen Rocket, who came into the promotional tournament as KMT and upset NIP, just demolished them 3-0, and then came into this new season riding that hype. And they've been able to, even though they suffered 3 losses, they've been able to bounce back after them and continue to put up consistent results against the lower tier teams and the top tier teams. So we have these, it's kind of the thing that I expect to see a lot more NA teams doing. Just with this past week, we saw Coast and Evil Geniuses kind of doing this themselves, and even a little bit for Team Curse and CLG, where now that they have their cohesive units and they have time to practice with each other, they're starting to show results. I think Super Hot Crew and SK Gaming are the 2 biggest examples of that. SK and Super Hot Crew, everybody expected to be towards the bottom side of everything. Super Hot Crew didn't even get into the LCS. They lucked out the fact that Lemon Dogs didn't submit their roster properly. There was multiple chances for them to get back into the LCS, and they capitalized on it. They've had such turmoil in the fact that they didn't have a gaming house. People were going back and forth. They had less than a week to prep for their first LCS matches, things like that. And what do they do with it? They take the fastest win in the European LCS against Gambit out of everybody. They dominate in a 2-0 victory for this week, and they're being able to beat the people that are above them as well as below them. So they're showing more consistency as a team. Same thing with SK Gaming. These middle-of-the-pack teams are identifying what goes wrong when they lose games, and are starting to come together as a unit to figure out, instead of somebody going, because when you analyze your own play, you'll be like, oh, I did this wrong, therefore I should do this better. When you're on a team, it's somebody did this wrong, this is what the team should do better to compensate for that, or we didn't go for these objectives. How can we rotate better? What do we do? And these teams are getting analysts, they're getting more communication, they're now in the same place as the rest of the team, so they can put up those consistent results. And that's always going to be the big thing, especially in Europe, is the most consistent team. Like last split, it was Lemon Dogs. When they get that consistency stride, they will be on the top. They might not be the most flashy and impressive team or have a lot of names behind them kind of backing that popularity, but if they show consistent results and can compete as well against the top teams as they do the bottom teams, those are the teams that are going to really start to emerge, and we've started to see that already.
So when you have this really consistent play going from week to week against essentially the same pool of people, and you can really learn those same groups, how do you think that skill set and that ability translates into a scenario such as Worlds? For those people who are new to the LCS or haven't experienced their first Worlds, typically, I mean, we see the Chinese and the Korean teams dominate. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that the NA teams and the EU teams get in and everything just seems to fall apart? And how do you think consistency within these similar not champion pools, but similar team pools really affects that transition going in?
Well,
there's a big question.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the whole thing.
It's kind of difficult because part of me wants to say the fact that we have NA teams playing in NA and EU teams playing in EU and et cetera, means that they're so well versed against their own region's play styles that when they encounter something new, it's a lot more difficult for them to adapt in the middle of the game. So kind of linking it into how consistently these teams perform, it also goes in with their mental focus into a game. Now, one of the things that we've seen a little bit more with teams like, I want to say SK Gaming mentioned this in one of their interviews when Candy Panda, after one of their victories, was talking to, I think it was Shox and Quickshot about it. And Aranea was talking about with Millennium with their more recent acquisition of, what's his name? I forget now, but their more recent acquisition of a coach. It's not only their job to help them with in-game focus, but help them outside of the game. SK has a sports psychologist on their roster to help them maintain their mental focus. So when you go into this cross-regional play, when you culminate into Worlds, you need to have that consistency in your gameplay as well as in your mental focus. So when you go into a game and you have something like Overpow picks Mordekaiser against you, what do? You have that consistency in your mental state where it's like, I don't know what this champion does. Let me play like I've always played against it and keep up with those consistent results. Let me stay safe. Let me not do anything stupid. Let me make sure that we're all on the same page with what has to be done. You know, the fact that all this outside research also comes in from analysts and any of the players who can put their own 2 cents from what other regions have been doing into the gameplay. I think the biggest reason why North American and European teams kind of miss the mark when compared to Korean and Chinese and even some Southeast Asian teams is the fact that it's the evil geniuses factor. More people watch NA and European LCS, so they expect more things. And let's put it into perspective here. Fnatic made it through the group stages at Worlds, went through the bracket, and took 3rd, 4th place. That's not bad. The teams they lost to were the 2nd place team, and then the 1st place team was SK Telecom, T1K, who is still dominating absolutely everybody. So if you want to put things in perspective, certain teams are not far off from, the Chinese or Korean overlord teams. It's just the fact that when they get down to it, after days of playing and everything, do they have that mental stability? Do they have the consistency behind them still to just kind of continue going for it? And I think the more and more we have LCS, the more and more the competition level rises, the more and more these teams start to gain that, where it's going to become second nature that, like, hey, maybe at Season 4 Worlds or Season 5 Worlds, like, everybody could be on an almost even footing, which would be competitively fantastic.
Absolutely.
It would be great to watch. I think another thing, building off of the North American scenes, used to playing against the North American scene, the European scenes, used to playing against the Europe scene, well, the Korean scene are generally known for being a little bit more innovative and a little bit more aggressive in their play styles and kind of taking control. And if you take control against a team that doesn't know what to do against you, they're not given time to think about how to react. And that's probably a lot to do with how those scenes tend to dominate.
Okay, cool. So let's start to get into where we were this week. It's week 5 of the LCS. Let's start off in Europe. I'm going to give a quick rundown of each game that was played, just win, lose, and then let's talk about really some of the bigger games that were in here. So we had SK defeating Fnatic, Superhot Crew over the Copenhagen Wolves, Rocket Cats over the Alliance, Gambit Gaming over Millennium, Superhot Crew over the Alliance, Millennium over Fnatic, Rocket over the Copenhagen Wolves, and SK Gaming over Gambit. Any of these games really sticking out to you guys in particular?
Well, for myself watching the games, two of them that really kind of stuck out in my mind were the first one, SK versus Fnatic, but more importantly, Roccat versus Alliance. So
Yeah,
just
those are
to
two right there.
kind of just to go over SK and Fnatic first, I guess, because it was the first match of the week. Coming into this one, SK, they played one game the prior week, I believe, and it was a loss. Before that, they went into the previous weeks, they had an upswing where they won their games. So they were kind of on that stage where they even said in the interview, Jesus was talking with after one of their game interviews, where we're playing less afraid, we're playing more as a unit, we're not too afraid to make a mistake on the big stage and be criticized for it. We're kind of more, we need to make these decisions to win a game, otherwise it's going to slip away from us. So SK goes into this game after a week 4 loss. Fnatic, they've also lost 3 games at this point, I believe. So they're on their own kind of downward slope. So Fnatic is kind of picking at the pieces as to like, okay, our double AP compositions aren't working. We need to maybe go back to like our basic roots and try to get something going. Whereas SK is still kind of like, all right, we have our cohesion now. We're not afraid. Let's take it to them. It's kind of like a David versus Goliath story. At this point, Fnatic was still tied for first, and SK was like around 5th, 6th place. And all of a sudden they come out with a very AD carry focused composition against the top 80 carry in the EU LCS, and they stomped them. Like the game wasn't so much of a stomp that it was like, oh man, SK completely destroyed Fnatic, but it was convincing enough of a win to be like, it's the same kind of focus. Any team can beat anybody when they kind of put their minds to it.
That's the one thing I love about the European LCS is all the teams are like so close together that you watch a game and you can't really predict who's going to be the winner because any of those teams can beat any of those other teams.
And you kind of have that we kind of cop out in the interviews where players will say, oh, who do you think is going to win this next matchup? Well, both teams are really good, so it's hard to predict. But in reality, it's really hard to predict.
Yeah.
I think Fnatic went into this matchup with like 90% of the vote, and SK won. And then there was another game where it was like Super Hot Crew against Gambit the previous week. Gambit had 96% of the vote, and they got 1 kill in the entire game against Super Hot Crew.
Yeah.
So it kind of speaks to testament of that.
How do those break down, though? I mean, is it really just which team is going to make the biggest mistakes, or are there certain ones that have more of an advantage over the other? I mean, you look at, Rocket with a 9-3 overall standing. If these teams are so close, what's making them different from, the bottom with just 4 wins and 8 losses?
Well, I think this is a point in time where we can kind of touch upon the Roccat versus Alliance matchup, because Alliance are bottom of the table in Europe, and Roccat is number 1. And they're tied for number 1 at this point as well. And Alliance, they kind of have this weird curse where in the odd weeks they lose all their games, in the even weeks they win all their games. So going into week 5, everyone expected Alliance to lose all their games. So when you look at this matchup, Alliance were doing really good against Roccat. Their laning phase is always touted as the best part of Alliance because they were highly skilled individual players that haven't had time to adapt to playing as a team. And that's when they were touted, like at the beginning of the season, wow, these guys are really strong. They win all their games in like 20-minute forfeits. Well, they don't have that cohesion for the transition from mid to late game to be able to deal with it. Whereas Roccat, even in the promotion tournament against NIP, 45-minute games, 50-minute games, dragging it out for a late game kill to be able to one-shot towers. And, well, not one-shot, but do a ridiculous
She's going to go down really quick.
It's like 3 hits and a tower's gone and like 2 hits and an inhibitor falls or something like that. But they have the experience and from playing together previously. KMT, Roccat, a Nexus, whatever they were the previous times, they've had the core 3 members, Zazis, Sulliver, and Overpow, since sometime in early Season 2. So they have the kind of communication down pat. Whereas with Alliance, you have strong solo laners, a very good early game, objective control in the early game. But with the way that the changes have come into the game more recently, late game dragons are worth so much more money. The Baron bait coming out is always a very big thing for teams to either win or completely lose. And in this game, we saw Roccat not losing their mental fortitude. Yeah, we're down in gold, we're down in objectives, our towers are missing. But at 40 minutes into the game, we win a team fight and just roll into their base and win. So the thing that separates the top tier from the bottom tier in Europe right now is it's what I like to refer as complexity syndrome. Back in Season 3 NA Spring Split, complexity looked good for the first 20 minutes of the game. And then they just lost, even to the point where they would have like an 8 to 10,000 gold lead, and then they couldn't finish a game. So being able to take that advantage and knowing how to finish a game, that's what these teams have to learn. And it's what's missing for some of the bottom of the tier, the kind of table teams. Millennium even said in an interview themselves, we could win our lanes, we can snowball advantages, but we didn't know what to do with it. Aranea said that their new coach, Dreams, which is the name which somebody in Twitch chat reminded me of, so thank you very much for that. Their focus was, when they looked at their replays, it was like, you guys have 0 dragons. They call them drakes in EU because they have to be weird like that, but you have 0 dragons, 0 dragons. So they focused in their game, and I think they took like 5 dragons to 0. And they won the game because they had all this gold, where when the part where they struggled at, they were so far ahead that even if they lost a fight, they knew they could just win the next fight. So these teams are slowly adapting to the point where, like, all right, so we know how to get to the end game with a large advantage that we can't lose, but now it's up to us to be like, well, if we don't have that large of a gold lead, what do we do?
All right.
Don't die.
Yeah, you're dying over there. Awesome.
I'm getting tired just kind of like sitting up for so long.
Well, here, just take your camera down and we'll just kind of lay across your
just
desk
lay on
there.
the carpet.
Yeah, a little bit. So any other important things this week in the EU?
No, just the SK game and the Rocket game are really the two that stuck out.
Okay.
I think one thing we really have to quickly touch upon is the fact that Gambit Gaming underestimates some of their opponents. Like, they lost to Super Hot Crew the week before, and then they go into this week and they destroy Millennium, were at the bottom of the table. And then they go up against SK Gaming, who are 2 or 3 places below them in the standings. This is the point where Gambit could have tied Rocket for first place. And they go into the game, they look like they forgot how to play. So it's one of those things too. Like, bottom of the table teams don't know how to close out games. Top of the table teams don't know how to keep their focus against lower teams in the beginning stages of the game. And Gambit's textbook example. They'll go into a game, they'll be like, all right, so Gambit have this thing of the Miracle Gambit team fight, which has always been their thing since they were like Empire. They'll go for a mid-game dragon. If they win that fight, they win the game. If they don't, it spirals downward and they just go completely on tilt. So, like,
Yep.
some teams that are at the bottom of the table, they need to be able to turn advantages into victories, whereas teams at the top of the table, they need to figure out, if they don't have advantages early on, what do they do to get them back before they start sliding down? So it's like, it's really weird because the bottom tier teams and the top tier teams are complete opposites. And I'm the complete opposite of Reckern.
Record down.
And he's dead.
Still standing.
Awesome. So let's take a look at week 6, the week coming up here. We have Millennium versus Copenhagen Wolves, Gambit versus Rocket, Super Hot Crew versus Fnatic, SK versus the Alliance, Fnatic versus Copenhagen Wolves, Gambit versus Super Hot Crew, Rocket versus SK, and Millennium versus Alliance. Which games out of here do you think are really going to be the bigger games to watch?
Well, I would have said Gambit versus Rocket is really awesome, but if you guys have checked out the Gambit Gaming website, they have some visa issues, and 3 of their members, Alex, Darian, and Diamond, aren't going to be able to make it. So they
I did not see that.
They only have their bottom lane, which gives up a lot of first bloods. So you're going to be going into this week with Gambit, 3 members down, arguably their weaker early game members still on the roster, with 3 players that probably haven't played together, and 3 players that probably don't speak Russian. So I'm not expecting a lot from these Gambit games this week, even though they had the potential. Rocket versus Gambit would have decided first place. Super Hot Crew versus Gambit would have been the rematch that could have put, like, at this point, if Super Hot Crew win their next 2 games, they could be tied for second. So that was, like, super hyped up. But at this point, the Gambit games aren't really going to matter or anything, which kind of shifts our focus. I think the biggest games are going to be Super Hot Crew against Fnatic and SK taking on Rocket.
Yeah, I actually am interested to see the Fnatic versus Copenhagen Wolves game. Fnatic being a team which is kind of on the descent, and Copenhagen Wolves kind of being a team which everybody knows they have a lot of potential. They just kind of have to step up to that next level. And a losing Fnatic is probably going to be a nice ego boost if they can pick up that win.
Do you really see, and I meant to grab this question in before we moved on, but do you really see these issues of having to do a lot of travel, and especially, I didn't even know, communication issues, not being able to speak Russian? That's a pretty big deal. Do you really see that as a huge hindrance in the EU scene? I mean, that kind of regional challenge compared to an A team, which for the most part, I mean, unless Curse wants to import any more Europeans, there's really not that gap. Time zones, I think, is the worst thing that you can face if you're not living together, which most of these teams are, and even then it's all, one to two time zones at best. Do you really see that as a challenge and something that makes it a little bit more difficult for them? Or is this something that's just not even a factor?
It's definitely something that makes it more difficult for them. Any kind of hindrance on your normal daily activities will start to take its wear and tear and fatigue on you, especially with the travel times. That's probably one of the biggest outside forces that teams would have to deal with, especially like Gambit. They can't even travel right now. That's how much of a hindrance it is.
So do you see that as a major, I guess, motivation for some of these teams to come to the NA side and try to compete in the North American scene? I mean, you see those games when they play them in Riot Studios. They're always packed. The fans are there. Is that really a factor? Was that one of the reasons that EG came over? Or is this something that just doesn't even come into play?
Yeah, that's definitely could be a factor. I know a lot of the North American teams are kind of like, they have their gaming houses near the studio. They aren't far from it. Like hour maybe is like the longest drive that I've heard of. And that helps a lot, like being close to where you got to go to actually play. You don't ever have to worry about traveling, providing food and water for yourself, all these typical things. Like you're just, all your things are at the house. So coming over to the North America and picking up a gaming house, I think even like LMQ did that from China. They picked up a gaming house next to the studio. It's probably a huge advantage to do that. And I don't know necessarily what the availability to do that over in Europe is with Germany, like picking up a gaming house or whatever over there. So it's tough to say if it's really that big of an advantage or not.
I kind of want to put like a little bit of a counterpoint into that one, because I feel like gaming houses in general, they have advantages, but they also have disadvantages. And this is something that pro players have been vocal about, and some pro players have been a little bit more in favor of. But when you look at results, Gambit Gaming, one of the best teams in Europe since they came into existence pretty much. 3 days of practice during the week, 2 days of travel, and like 1 or 2 off days. Like Edward himself has like a full day's journey because he literally lives in Siberia. Like his home is Siberia in Russia. So like it was like, I remember like being in like high school Spanish class, and like if we were disrupting the class, our teacher would pull our desk to the front and be like, "Oh, you're in Siberia. You're far away from everybody." This guy lives there, so like I can only imagine how much worse that is going to be. But with all their travel time, with all their lack of days to practice, second place Spring Split EU LCS, they made it to Worlds. They lost to Najin Black Sword, a Korean team, at Worlds Season 3.
Very good Korean team.
They are currently in second place in the European LCS behind Rocket. And this is all with their travel time woes. So whereas some teams I think can still do it, it is a bit of a hindrance to other teams that may not have played with each other for 3 or 4 years like Gambit has. But on the flip side, basically living at your job is also a hindrance. Like, let's put it this way. Alex and Diamond are married. They have wives. Alex has a kid. who's actually turned 1 this past week, which is kind of cute. But they have lives outside of their gaming to kind of, if they needed to take a step back to get a mental refresh, they are able to do so. Whereas teams in NA who live in gaming houses so close to the Riot Studio and are so focused on League of Legends, they don't have anything else. We've heard Alex Penn talking about this in his interview just yesterday, where he dedicates 1 complete day off for all of Coast. And on that day, they do things that are not League of Legends at all. They play board games. They play with the other players. They let them go out and have hang out with other friends. They go get food. They go, do other things. So having
a good point.
That period to give yourself a mental refresh and a renewed perspective on the game, I think it's equally as beneficial as being in the same place to practice all of the time. So while both of them have their plus and minus sides, I kind of feel like teams can perform under both conditions, albeit one being literally a little bit more difficult to play and the other one being more difficult to keep your focus. Kind of going on the thing of, does this why teams want to move to NA? I don't think so at all. I think some of the things that factor into wanting to go from NA to EU, EU to NA, or as some of the other players have done, Korea to Brazil, is just your own performance, how you're going to adapt and learn from a different perspective. And then, of course, potentially, like in the case of Bjergsen and TSM, there may be some monetary initiatives for that. But the fact of the matter is, like, Bjergsen was on NIP who were put into relegations, and he has a chance to move over to now the top team in North America. If you have an opportunity like that, you can move to Siberia. If you're going to be on the best team in Siberia, you're going to go for that.
Unless you move over to Curse and just be super disappointing. But you know what? I don't blame that on Edward. For those of you who didn't watch last season and saw Edward, the European import into the North American team Curse, it was overall not that impressive. And now they have St. Vicious as a support, which is just neat, because why not? You can just make St. Vicious do
because fuck it.
Yeah. Out of retirement, in retirement. Curse can do whatever they want, I guess.
I think League of Legends players as a whole kind of need to understand what the word retirement means.
Well, actually,
so for the best,
it means I'm no longer playing professionally at this time.
Hold on, I wanna pick up on that after we go over the NA LCS. Let's do this week, next week, and then we're gonna get back to that point. So pin on that question right there. So NALCS, I don't know if I went over the wins and losses, so I'm going to cut through that really quick. CLG over Cloud9, EG over Curse, thank God I hate Curse. Coast over XDG, TSM over Dignitas, Curse over XDG, probably a fluke. C9 over Dignitas, Coast over Evil Geniuses, and in the most recent game, a lot of you probably joining us straight from that, is TSM over CLG.
TSM.
Absolutely. TSM is the best. So let's talk about two of the teams that are currently sitting pretty low to the bottom. Team Coast versus XGG. Break down that game. What happened in that game, and why is this important for the two teams?
All right, so I'm going to break this down in the too long didn't read perspective, and then Reckern, if you want to pick up from after that, we'll go with that. Okay, so here's what happened.
There's any need for more than a too long didn't read, honestly.
So here's what happened here. Team Coast picked Jax. Jax got 13 kills. Team Coast won the game.
End of story.
That's what happened.
I mean, you can't really put anything else into that game. The whole game was literally just like the Zion Spartan show. It was ridiculous. He's just killing everybody.
Like, that game was kind of like, it was two teams at the bottom of the table, and it was an evolution of how they are going to identify things. And I think prior to the game, there was an interview that they did for the preview segment where Benny from XDG was talking about things that the team needed to improve on. And the quote that stuck out to me for that was, Benny was quoted as saying the problem with the team is we don't know the root of the problem. If you're a team and you are struggling at the bottom of the North American LCS, the highest competition in NA, and you don't know why you are down there, you need to get into that mind state training. You need to figure out the problem, because if you go into the game week by week not knowing what your problem is, you're never going to fix it. You could have a game where you just pick champions that outscale everybody and let Dignitas throw the game at Baron, and that could be the way that you're going to win every game, but that's not going to happen all the time. Then when you go against people who you are trying to beat out for being last place, and they pick something oddball, they pick something that everybody considers is not fitting for the current metagame, and you are not able to adapt to that, you are not able to stop it from happening, and you continue to lose that game to the point where the Jax gets 13 kills and split pushes you to death single-handedly, you're going to have more issues than just losing that game. Whereas on Coast side, if you can refresh your point of view, if you can make Nintendo going from dying 8 times on Pantheon to setting things up as Vi and everything else that he's done this week, if you can make Zion Spartan go from playing uncomfortable, awkward champions to being able to carry a game again, if you can have Shifter not die at all on Nidalee, if you can refresh
yeah, he did really
like
well
that,
on Nidalee.
It's basically complete opposite spectrum. One losing team looking at criticisms and improving, another team still struggling to figure out what they need to improve on.
So let me ask you the pivotal question. What is more important when these teams go into a match? Do you need to play to the team that you're going up against, or play into your own style? And which needs to be the
From
focus?
the bottom of the tier, I really got to say it's just play your own style. You're not playing against a team which is like considered the best. You're playing against a team which is known to make like all these mistakes. And if you just continue to play your own style and not make those mistakes, naturally you'll win.
Mm-hmm.
Back when XDG was known as Team Fear going into IPL 5, they had this very weird syndrome where every single online tournament, they would do super well. And then when they got onto a LAN environment, they would go into picks and bans and be like, oh, such and such is open. Let's pick that even though we've never practiced it. They fixed that when they got into Season 3 of the NALCS. I mean, they went into the playoffs. They took, 3rd place in Spring Split. They took 2nd place in the season of Summer. They made it to Worlds. They barely missed out on getting out of the groups due to some of their own minor mechanical mistakes, but they proved that they had improved from that point. They have a coach. They have analysts, they have managers, they have everybody behind them to fund or to fuel a winning mentality. And then they go into this season, they switch some things around with their roster, they feel very strongly about it, but they're not showing the rest of the fans and the rest of the LCS why it was the right choice. And with all those resources behind them, they just kind of fallen back into that same kind of state where it looks like they're playing things because they can get them. I don't know if it's a small champion pool. I don't know if it's a thing that they're just going into these games trying to react to what their opponents are doing, but they haven't defined. They're going into these games with last year's mentality in a new patch, a new season with a different lineup, and it's not working. So rather than trying to continue to react and adapt to what other teams are doing, which is normally what teams struggle with, they need to find their own play style and then apply those principles. They still haven't found their own play style because this roster swap came in after Battle of the Atlantic. So they've basically had as much time as they've had less time than every other LCS team to practice with what they have right now. And I think that's the thing they're struggling on. Well, if they are able to go back and identify their own play style, this team made it to Worlds. They are going to be good. They just need to kind of remind themselves of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think they're kind of in the slump, and they're just not willing to take the advice that everybody's trying to give to them, and they're just so stuck on this swap that they made, and they think it's a good decision, and they haven't really shown the results that they need to.
Come on, Reckern. Don't you know that when you tell LCS players how bad they are in chat, they get upset and they don't want to do that anymore?
I didn't even consider chat one of those mediums which they were informed.
Well, I guess at that point, like how can these teams really ingest this kind of criticism? I mean, how far can you be in outside of your training and outside of your, I guess, professional life to actually receive that. If you don't even have those tools internally, if you don't have the analysts and the managers, or maybe you do and they're just not the right people and not doing you the credit. I mean, this is a question of ignorance. How new is the title of team analyst? How well developed is this position?
I guess
it's been around in like the Korean scene for a little while. I think even since like StarCraft days. As far as North America, it's really only this last season where teams have been picking up coaches and analysts.
I think it really depends on what you're. So I feel the role of coaches and analysts in an LCS state is very mixed. And I feel like it depends on the individual as well. So I guess the definition of an analyst is somebody that is going to go over picks and bans, somebody that is going to look at games and look at strategies and look at how your players are playing and help them identify problems, help them identify what they need to do in certain situations, and give them that knowledge so that when they get into the game, the players can take that information and use it properly. I feel like a coach is more responsible for setting up scrimmages, for making sure the team has the resources that they need to make sure that the players' mental health is a bit better. So like the analyst is like the guy that helps them with the game, and the coach is the one that helps them with the team, if that makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
We've seen already that EU and NA teams, they have separate coaches and analysts, and they do different jobs. But the thing is, when it comes down to it, you can have the best analyst in the business. But if your players go into that matchup and don't ingest the information, they're not going to perform with it. Case in point, going back again to my own personal experience, working with Double Buff for the spring into summer split promotion tournament, I was an analyst with the team. And I had outlined picks and bans, I had outlined strategies, and I looked at how they were going to play against Azure Cats, who wound up losing to CLG in the tournament after that Double Buff lost to them. So we looked at the games, and we had a game plan. We had picks that we wanted. We had things that happened. When they got into that land setting and sat down and were in the game, they didn't do any of it, and they lost. So you can literally prepare the teams and prepare the players for the utmost optimal situation. But it is on the players to be able to execute that. So having an analyst, having a coach, it doesn't matter. Like, it matters that you have them, and it matters that you give them the information. But if your players aren't able to identify their own problems, and the analyst isn't able to help them solve their own problems, then what do you do? Like, you need to have something in place to help that. If it's a situation where the analyst isn't working, the analyst goes away. If it's a situation where the player isn't working, well, we've already seen the fact that these teams are very open to player swaps.
Oh yeah, there was tons of player swaps coming into this season.
Okay. So let's shift focus. The other big game I think of note was definitely going to be CLG versus Cloud9. I mean, Cloud9 last season was absolutely dominant. And I think a big part of that was that they were so new into the scene, and it was kind of this just expected, upturn of Curse and TSM are going to battle it out, and then, Dignitas and CLG, they're going to be fighting around, and then all of a sudden you have Cloud9 come out of nowhere and just start dominating one after the other. And I think for me, that was a big testament to NA's ability to react to something that's just so new and so out of their normal sync that they weren't even able to really take that on. But now we have a team that is incredibly underperforming. And this is going to get into the topic that we're going to hopefully be able to pick back up in the last 6 minutes of the show. But CLG, being able to take out Cloud9.
So, just kind of going with last split, at the MLG cast and everything, and even going back into, Cloud9 lost in the group stages of the original promotion tournament, and that was crushing. Because at that point in time, they had Yuzuki in top lane. They were a strong contender. They should have made it into LCS. But they derped, and they didn't take anything seriously. So they went into the challenger scene, and they had to shift focus. High moved to the mid lane. They lost Yuzuki to school. They picked up balls. Turtle went to TSM. They picked up Sneaky. They added Meteos into the jungle. They adapted. They were a strong team and should have been in LCS. The teams knew this. And casting MLG and going through the Rising Stars and all the Challenger Circuit things, Cloud9 constantly won. They were like the Copenhagen Wolves going into the EU LCS this season. They won everything. And when they made it into LCS, they continued winning. They had that kind of state of mind where we screwed up the first time. We're not screwing up again. And they persevered through it to the point where they lost 3 games, and then they lost games at Worlds. That was it. So Cloud9, they've had that factor. And the other teams, I think, were just a little bit comfortable last season. Like, they secured their spots. If they weren't in promotion relegation, they didn't have to worry about it. But now they realize the competition is fierce, and we do have to worry about it, because when it comes to playoffs and it comes to qualifying for Worlds, we don't make it there. We don't do anything for months on end. And to be completely honest, they probably get pretty bored, because there's no other teams to scrim against at that point either besides each other. So, like, now that we've gotten to this new season, Cloud9, I feel like they still have an air of competence. They may not come across of it in their interviews and everything, but this is a new season. These are new things. Meteos can't play the jungle the same way, and High needs to learn new champions, and they're slowly coming into themselves. But CLG, they've had roster problems. They've had subs.
CLG's always a new roster every split.
Exactly. Every week at this point, it's been a new CLG
every week
roster.
shit.
This is the first week that they've had time to practice with their team, figure things out, and they had their coach/analyst, Monte Cristo, available to them for the entire time. And what do? They hone all their skills, they rotate around the map, and they beat what used to be the best team in North America. That's pretty much it. Like, you have one team that, because they had all these hardships in the first couple of weeks, really needed to make a statement against a team that is still looking strong, but knows they have things to patch up. Well, this is one of the holes that CLG was able kind of to wiggle into, because Cloud9, for the beginning part of the game, it was close. But CLG had the proper rotations, whereas Cloud9, well, that's something that they've said that they've struggled on.
Okay. So taking a look at this this upcoming week as we very quickly approach the end of the time, we have Dignitas on EG, Solo Mid versus Team Coast, Curse on Cloud9, CLG on XDG, Cloud9 on Evil Geniuses, Team Solo Mid versus Curse, Coast versus CLG, and Dignitas versus XGG. Personally, I'm pretty excited to see Dignitas versus EG, just because to me these are two really underperforming teams compared to what at least I'm used to seeing in terms of, you know, what they're doing, and I want to see how those teams operate. Dignitas right now 6-6, EG 4-8. I think EG has a really good opportunity to get a pretty substantial win off of this and use that momentum to, you know, go forward in the upcoming weeks. I'm also like the quintessential match for me is TSM versus Curse, because I
wonder why.
I like to see TSM win. Honestly,
I like to watch Curse lose, so it's like a win-win.
And it's like, for a while, you know what? I was actually in the beginning of the season, and I wish we had the podcast going then. In the beginning of the season, when I heard that St. Vicious was stepping out and he was going to be in more of a coaching role, I was actually totally willing to reconsider Curse as a team altogether, because I do think that St. Vicious is a great player. He's obviously one of the top players out there. I think he can present his knowledge in a great way. He's a cocky douchebag, but when you're able to sit on the other side of the team and be that cocky douchebag and say, you did this wrong and you did that wrong, and then use that as a method of improvement, that would have been a great opportunity. But here we are. Definitely. Now he's support. So those are the games I'm looking forward to. How about you guys? We have 1 minute. You have less than 30 seconds.
Less than 30 seconds? I mean, yeah, I'm looking forward to all the games every week.
I gotta say,
definitely the Team Solo Mid versus Curse. I think that'll be a good game, and the Cloud9 versus Curse.
Curse versus
Curse is just this team that's like always has the potential to just take down the monsters.
Coast versus CLG is gonna be the game for me. Okay. Coast won 2 games. CLG went 1-1. CLG looks good. Coast figured out their own play style. who figures out the other team and who's the real.
Sounds good.
I think that's the match to watch.
All right. Well, that is going to do it for the first episode of the TForce LCS Rundown. I have been Mott Ganorum, blazing in tux for our first episode. Joined as always, and I say as always because that's what I used to say at the end of this.
100% of the time here.
100% attendance rate. We have Reckern and Optimus Tom. And we will be signing out. Do not forget to find each of us individually on Twitter. We are going to work on getting one Twitter for the show where you can tweet at us and tell us how bad we're doing or how bad my microphone is popping. I apologize for that. New setup, new apartment. We're working on it. Reckern, what do you tweet at?
At Reckern.
Perfect. And Optimus Tom?
I'm at Optimus Tom.
Wow, we're so original. I should just.
I've used Reckern for like literally everything since I was in high school. It's just my last name, first initial, and I like it. It's a good handle.
Awesome. All right, and don't forget to check out the MP3 on iTunes, which will be available, I believe, Tuesday. Mondays you have the Trinity Force podcast to enjoy, as well as Wednesdays, and then the OzLOL podcast on Thursdays. So from everybody here at the Trinity Force Podcast Network, have a good night, and yeah, we'll work on a better sign-out practice at some point, because it's been a while since I did it.
You're just kind of rambling. You're like Rivington Blind Alley casting right now.
Pretty much, exactly. And I don't even know if it's called the Trinity Force Podcast Network. I just made that up.
Oh, it is.
Is that exactly what it is?
I thought it was the Trinity Force Network.
I think one podcast is the Sheen, one is the Zeal, and we're the Phage, and we just all kind of come together.
So does that make the Sheen props?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, have a good